Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Hope you guys are doing well today. And we've got some more player rankings to take a look at. More fun off-season filler, more stuff to talk about because as of right now, the Seahawks are not giving us a lot to discuss in terms of actionable stuff. We are midway through July now, and the team is having a really quiet post-draft off-season. It's not like last year where you had at least a few things going on. This year it's been like Mario Edwards and the Lockett restructure, and that's it. So we got to make our own conversation pieces, and sometimes ESPN can help. So I've already received some questions from people asking me what I think about ESPN's player rankings. So I thought I'd go ahead and put together a video about it because as of yesterday, they've finished the defensive side of the ball. So basically, what ESPN has done here is they've polled a group of people involved in the NFL, executives, coaches, scouts, and apparently even some players. They poll these guys and ask them, who do you guys think are the best players at this position? And then they kind of pool their findings together. And while at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if a player ranks high on these lists, it only matters if they go out onto the field and perform on game day. That might actually be more interesting than even what PFF was doing because this is kind of like what PFF did with their positional rankings. It's a little more narrow because it's talking about players and not groups, but still potentially pretty interesting. And the fact that they're not just leaning on some talking head or some column writer for their take, or even combining the takes of like three or four or five people who work at ESPN, the fact that they're going out there and talking with executives and coaches and scouts is, I don't know, I think that's a little more interesting than even what PFF was doing. Even if what PFF was doing was in terms of what they were actually accumulating was probably more meaningful. So I thought this was interesting, and now that ESPN has finished doing their top 10 rankings for each position on the defense, thought I'd go ahead and go through it and talk about it through a Seahawks lens. Now, this is the defense. This is the side of the ball where the Seahawks are somewhat less likely to be great in 2023. It's the side of the ball they were certainly not great on in 2022. So it's probably not going to be great. However, it can be good. It can be decent. It can be interesting. So this one, off-ball linebacker, you go through the list here: Fred Warner, Roquan Smith, Tremaine Edmonds. Obviously, there's one guy on the Seahawks who has a chance to be here, and he's not. You get down to number 10, Dre Greenlove, the 49ers. He he's number 10, and we haven't seen Bobby yet. However, Bobby Wagner of the Seattle Seahawks is listed here in honorable mentions. He's the first honorable mention. I don't know if that means he's 11th or what, but we can go ahead and say it's 11th. Like, if you're going to list the honorable mentions in any kind of order, it would probably be that order. So Bobby Wagner finishes presumably 11th, which actually surprises me. Not necessarily because I disagree with it, but Bobby to me is a player that a lot of people think is still like a top five linebacker, I feel like even PFF had him like what, sixth or seventh. So the fact that ESPN, or not ESPN, but the people who put this list together have him just outside the top 10, I think it's probably appropriate, especially given the fact that he's getting older and that's going to catch up to him eventually. I i actually think this is probably about right. It surprises me that he's not in the top 10 after the season he just had. But I actually think this is pretty much on the dot. So Bobby Wagner presumably is in 11th. And by the way, if you go down here to the guys who also got some votes, Jordan Brooks is here, which, okay, sure, whatever. Moving on. Okay, we also have defensive tackles. They rank their top 10 defensive tackles. And I don't think I'm going to really spoil anything for anybody when I tell you that there is no Seahawk in the top 10 here. You go through this list, you can see some really, really good players listed low in the top 10, and it kind of reminds you how good defensive line play is in the NFL right now. It feels like these guys are feels like these guys should be top 5, like a guy like a Jonathan Allen or a Cam Hayward or a Daron Payne, and they're barely hanging on in the top 10. It's like we got some really good pieces on the defensive line right now. Now, obviously, I don't agree with Aaron Donald being ranked that high anymore. I don't think he's what he was, but there's going to be a little bit of reputation here. But either way, it's not like I'm arguing that a Seahawk should be in the top 10. Of course not. Yeah, we also don't have a Seahawk in honorable mentions, so nobody in the top 15. We did, however, have one guy getting votes. So I guess you could say he's in the top 20. It's Dre'Mont Jones. So there is a little bit of Seahawks representation on our defensive line. So that's better than last year, right? I don't think you would have put Shelby Harris in the top 20 of defensive linemen last season going into the year. Maybe you would have, but this is a completely different circumstance even if you would have. Shelby Harris was on the wrong side of 30. Dre'Mont Jones may not even be in his prime yet. Very different situation. So, not a lot going on for the Seahawks on this defensive line ranking. I do think Dre'Mont probably deserves to be getting votes, but I don't think he should be in the top 15. He has a chance to blow into the top 15 if he has a big season this year, which I think is on the table. Now, let's go on over to the edge rushers, and this is another area where the Seahawks are doing pretty well here. I think most people are pretty on board with our edge rusher crew. The issue is we don't really have a guy who is a killer. Like you've got like Nick Bosa up here, you got Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons. These guys are killers. We've got a crew of good guys, but we don't have that one dominant guy. We have a stable of guys who are solid and effective, but we don't have that one super duper star. So go through the list here. Obviously, there's no Seahawk in the top 10. And you go through the honorable mentions. There's no Seahawk in the honorable mentions. However, once again, we had a player getting votes. Uchenna Nwosu received votes as, I mean, somebody out there considers him to be a top 10 edge player in the NFL. Now, if you're assuming that the rankings are being done in order of how many votes they got, Nwosu didn't even make the top 20. He's actually 21st. But when you combine that with what will hopefully be, and I fully expect to be a breakout season from Boye Mafe, and hopefully we get something at least positive from Darrell Taylor, and whatever rookie Derek Hall can offer, it should be pretty good. And that's more important than any one player being dominant. But yeah, we're lacking in star power on the edge right now. If you take these rankings to be gospel, we don't even have one player in the top 20. But hey, we did get our name mentioned with one guy. Okay, now we're going to do cornerback. And this is the one that I think most people took note of in the Seahawks community. This is the one that people had the biggest criticisms of. This is the one that seemed to get people actually upset. Like, I don't think that there are really any Seahawks fans out there who's sitting there thinking, oh, Dre'Mont Jones is a top 10 defensive tackle, or that Uchenna Nwosu is a top 10 edge player. I don't think Seahawks fans are sitting there thinking that, but I think a lot of them think we should have had a corner in the top 10 for this ESPN ranking. So you go through the list here. You've got Surtain, you've got Sauce, you've got Ramsey, who, I'm going to say this again, I think he's overrated now. I don't think he should be a top 3 corner. I was not impressed with him for the most part last year. Jair Alexander, Darius Slay, usual suspects, and we get all the way down to number 10 here, and there is no Tariq Woolen. So that means Tariq Woolen did not make ESPN's top 10. He did, however, make honorable mention down here at, call it 13th. So ESPN has Tariq Woolen as, let's call it the 13th best cornerback in the NFL. And some people are definitely, they don't like that. Some Seahawks fans really do not care for that evaluation. They think he should be top 10. Obviously, there was a big Sauce Gardner versus Tariq Woolen fight during the season, and now going into the offseason, who's better, who's going to be better, etc., etc. I do think that Tariq Woolen had a phenomenal season last year. The rate at which he took away the ball, the rate at which he was involved in turnovers while still being relatively shut down. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. As a player, however, I see where this is coming from. I don't think I agree with it, but where this comes from pretty clearly to me is the fact that Woolen is a bad tackler and a bad run defender. And that's the eye test, that's the stats, that's PFF. There are video essays on YouTube about how Tariq Woolen doesn't really know what he's doing in run support yet. And I think that drags it down. And I understand that. I think it's correct. That's something he really needs to work on. That being said, I do think the season that Tariq Woolen had with all those takeaways he was involved in should probably get more credit than this. But as a player, I don't think they're that far off. Like, I think they're a little bit off. Like, Tariq Woolen, I would take Woolen over AJ Terrell. And I know AJ Terrell's a really good player, don't get me wrong, but I would take Woolen over a guy like AJ Terrell. That I don't see where AJ Terrell has done something so great, or is it Terrell? I don't know. But I don't see where that guy's done anything so great that I'm willing to bump him above Woolen just because Woolen isn't a good tackler yet. You know, Trayvon Diggs, obviously all the takeaways, but he's given up like he's given up like close to 2,000 yards in coverage over the last 2 seasons, I believe. So there's some real holes in his resume too if you want to start there. So yeah, we did not get a cornerback in the top 10, but Tariq Woolen, honorable mention, presumably 13th. Nobody else on the Seahawks, of course. I don't think there's anybody else you could even really consider because they're not going to do rookies because that's hard to decipher. Um, they did one last position on the defense, safeties. And this is another one that's gotten a little bit of controversy. You've got Minka at the top, Derwin James, Justin Simmons, Buda Baker. Usual suspects. I don't think anybody would argue against these safeties being really good, but Quandre Diggs gets left out in the cold just a little bit here. He's 12th, at least I think. Um, and Diggs sounded off on Twitter about how he feels like, hey, where's my credit? I've been consistent for the last several years. I've been a really good player. I've got takeaways. I've got stats. I've got consistency. Where's my respect? I should be top 10. And I I'm not super high on the season that Diggs had last year. I don't think it's his fault. I think some of it was because he was coming off of a major injury, and I do expect him to bounce back in 2023. Maybe bounce back is not the right phrase, but I do expect him to be better. A year removed from that devastating injury, I think he'll be able to cover a little more ground, be a little bit of a better tackler, and I do think we'll see a slightly better Quandre Diggs in 2023. And by the way, this article specifies that Antoine Winfield, who was 10th, was tied with Diggs and Marcus Williams. So 10, 11, and 12 could basically be put in any order if you take ESPN literally when they say that. So I think that Diggs being 12th, just outside the top 10 right now, is pretty understandable after the season that he just had, where there were some issues. Like there were. Diggs didn't get an interception until I think after the halfway point of the season. He dropped some easy ones that, by the way, really, really had a big impact in the games that he dropped them in. He missed tackles. He didn't have quite the range that he did in previous years, I don't think. But this is kind of what I'm going to say about this. Diggs should be a top 10 safety again this year if he does have a little bit of an improvement, which I expect because he's a year removed from that massive injury. And that's also kind of how I feel about the Tariq Woolen thing. Yeah, they didn't put him in the top 10, but they put him so close to the top 10. If he makes reasonable improvements as a player from last year to this year, he'll be top 10. So think about it in terms of what the implication is. And the implication is, yes, this defense lacks star power. They didn't give us a single player in the top 10 of any of their positions. But we got some guys who absolutely should be on the table to get there with just a little bit of a bump in the right direction that is reasonable to expect. All right, see you guys later. Go Hawks. Let me know what you think. Next week when ESPN does the offensive side of the ball, I'll talk about that. That's obviously the side of the ball we're a little more excited about right now, I think. But yeah, no Seahawks in the top 10 on defense, but we did have quite a few honorable mentions and some, I don't know, runners up to the honorable mentions, whatever you want to call it. Let me know what you think.